So I'm just gonna get this out of the way right at the beginning of the month. If I ever can't come up with a good intro to these videos, or if in the case of today's video I don't like the intro that I shot, I'm just gonna show you one of my Halloween cats and tell you a spooky fact about him. So today we're gonna be featuring Mrs. Pumpkin, and did you know that her birthday is actually on Halloween, October 31st? And she was born in a pumpkin patch, that's why her name is Mrs. Pumpkin! Oh, and she's a global icon and national treasure. Get a good look at all your adoring fans, Mrs. Chunk. Get a good look at all your fans. How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the House of Horror, and today we're going to be talking about 10 films that sparked my horror interest. I've talked about it a few times on the show before, but as a kid I was a bit of a scaredy cat. But although a lot of things really scared me as a kid, I was always sort of drawn to the spooky stuff. And today we're going to be looking at 10 films that sort of scratched that itch for me. Not all of these are horror films. In fact, most of them aren't horror films. A lot of them are family films that have a little bit of spookiness thrown in. And I'm not going to be going in any particular order with this. I'm just going to go with what's on the top of my head. So to start things off for number 10, I'm actually clumping together all the classic Disney animated films that have something spooky in them. I know it's a little bit of a cop-out to clump a bunch of films together for the number 10 slot, but you really can't talk about one of them without talking about all of them. And if I were to individually showcase them on the list, it would take up a lot of the list, so I really have no choice other than to put them all together. When you think of Disney, you think of fun, family-friendly entertainment, but they've never really shied away from giving us the spooky stuff too. A lot of their feature films, even some of the earliest feature films that they ever made, had a horror element to them. In Snow White, we had the spooky woods. In Pinocchio, we had the kid transforming into a donkey. And Fantasia had Chernabog, this giant devil on top of a mountain. And we also can't forget all those trippy as ball scenes, like Dumbo when he gets drunk and has those hallucinations, or when Winnie the Pooh has the nightmare about the heffalumps and woozles. And of course, I think the ultimate one that had us all freaked out as kids was the Headless Horseman. I could just keep going on and on and on about these, and I haven't even listed all the films that have some sort of horror influence in them, because honestly, we'd be here all day. Perhaps someday down the line I'll do a list of the top 10 scariest Disney moments. But yeah, nevertheless, Mickey, thanks for the nightmares. And while we're at it, let's talk about a few more films that aren't marketed like horror films, but definitely can be described as them. And another film that's marketed as a fun, family-friendly kids film is The Wizard of Oz. And now you may be thinking to yourself, The Wizard of Oz, how on earth could that be scary? Well, my friends, let's take the yellow brick road down memory lane. May I remind you of the haunted forest with the walking trees, the flying monkeys tearing the scarecrow apart, all those giant guards going, oh, wee-oh, whoa! And you're getting all of that on top of the Wicked Witch herself, who would send chills down any kid's spine. There's all of that, plus you add on the rumors and conspiracy theories that we all heard on the playground about how a midget hung himself in the background. So yeah, The Wizard of Oz, man, it's not all that it seems. One more film that isn't marketed like a horror film at all is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I mean, do I even really need to explain this one? We all know about the tunnel scene. We see some genuinely disturbing imagery here, like a chicken getting its head cut off, some sort of snake crawling across someone's face. And then you add the tense music, the flashing lights, and Gene Wilder completely going insane. He starts off by quietly singing some demented nursery rhyme, that crescendos into him yelling about the fires of hell a-blowing, and then just goes all out into a big blood-curdling scream. What the hell is this? And then after that, it's never even brought up again. And to add to the disturbing nature of the film, we never see what happens to all the kids that don't follow the rules. Like when Violet keeps blowing up into that big blueberry or Veruca falls down that shaft, we never see what happens to them. In the book and in the Tim Burton remake, we see all the kids at the end, and yeah, they're a little messed up, but they're all still alive. Here we have no idea what happened to these kids. Are they dead? Well, I guess like getting to the center of a Tootsie Pop, the world may never know. So I guess next let's transition into some films that were marketed towards kids, but they were marketed with that spooky edge. Films like The Little Vampire. This one was one of my favorites growing up, and it actually may have been the first vampire film that I ever saw. I, of course, was aware of what a vampire was from Sesame Street and Count Chocula and stuff like that, but there weren't very many vampire films at the time for kids. Our story focuses on a young boy who moves with his family to Scotland, and he finds that he doesn't really fit in with anyone there. And then he meets a family of vampires who really don't fit in with anyone there. So we're basically getting a double whammy fish out of water story. It has a nice twist on the vampire folklore, and it's a nice twist to have us relate to the vampires instead of the vampire hunter. But this Van Helsing type guy is just so ruthless, and he makes for such a great villain. My wife and I actually rewatched this film recently, and it holds up rather well. And I think it's the first and only time we're ever gonna see vampire cows. And speaking of animal monster crossovers, how about Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman? This is one that me and my brother would watch on TV constantly. There was also Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein, but I don't know if it just wasn't aired on TV as much or it wasn't as memorable because I honestly don't remember watching it ever. But I remember this Wolfman one though, and could probably go over the story beat by beat without watching it in well over a decade and a half. But just the basic premise of the story is that Lawrence Talbot actually moves in next door to Alvin and the Chipmunks, and the boys just know that there's something weird going on with this guy. And of course, one dark and stormy night, Theodore is actually bitten by a strange wolf-like creature, and he slowly sees himself becoming hairier, stronger, and just has more ravenous type instincts. So yes, Theodore the Chipmunk is turning into a werewolf. So it's up to Alvin and Simon to reverse the curse before the full moon when it's uncurable. On top of all this werewolf stuff going on, the school is actually putting on a production of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, so you're really getting two classic horror stories in one. The film is very memorable, and I'm probably gonna have to rewatch it one of these days, because I remember it being a ton of fun, and it had a really killer soundtrack. Get it? Killer horror movies? Oh, I hate myself. But it's not my only film on the list that has an amazing soundtrack, because next we're going to be talking about Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island and The Witch's Ghost. Talk about films with great original soundtracks. We've got Terror Time Again, The Ghost is Here, and all the songs by the Hex Girls. Oh, the Hex Girls. I talked briefly about the direct-to-video Scooby-Doo films in my Bojangles vlog, and for this list I'm gonna have to go with a two-way tie between Zombie Island and Witch's Ghost. And if you think it's a cop-out having multiple films share a spot on my list for the second time, I have one thing to say to you. It's my list, I can do what I want to. What set these two films apart from their predecessors in the Scooby-Doo franchise is that it was actually marketed as a scary film, and a big selling point of that is that the monsters were real this time. In Zombie Island's case, of course, we have actual zombies, and on top of that, we have those crazy cat people. Zombie Island is undoubtedly the scarier of the two films, but Witch's Ghost is no slouch either. And plus, Witch's Ghost has the Hex Girls. Oh, the Hex Girls. Trust me, 8-year-old buddy loved the Hex Girls. But anyway, both of these films have a lot of twists and turns in the story, with a lot of ethical layers to the story that even had us as kids wondering who was right and who was wrong. Or I guess who was wrong and who was wronger. All the villains were certainly evil. But either way, both of these films were instrumental in shaping who I was as a horror fan. And speaking of instrumental, those Hex Girl songs are still bangers, trust me. Okay, stop talking about the Hex Girls. Alright, I'm good. So the next film on our list is actually going to be Ghostbusters. I saw this film for the first time on TV at my grandma's house, heavily edited I'm sure, but it was the first time that I can recall seeing a horror film that blended in comedy so well that wasn't a cartoon, or something that was made for children. I remember seeing things popping up on the screen that were genuinely terrifying, but then cutting back to the Ghostbusters themselves, and their reactions were always just so funny. So on one side I'm scared out of my mind, but the other side of me is laughing. Because although some of the other films on my list had horror and comedy in them, the horror and comedy weren't happening at the same exact time. In Ghostbusters, they were. And I think that this was the key film that got me into horror comedies, which I'm a huge fan of today, Evil Dead 2 being my favorite. I love films that can blend the laughs and the scares together without overshadowing each other. And Ghostbusters was also a key film for me in terms of special effects. At the time, I had never seen anything like this. I didn't end up seeing films like Jurassic Park or other films of that nature until I was a little bit older, so at the time the ghosts in Ghostbusters were the most mind-blowing things that I've ever seen. So much so that they looked real, and who knows, maybe they were. Okay, probably not, but still, let's move on to the next film on our list, which is The Temple of Doom. Now this one is a very traumatizing memory for me and one that I can recall vividly. It was in 4th grade near the end of the semester and the teachers didn't really want to start a new lesson before they sent us off for winter break. So they did what any teachers would do. They took all the desks out of the biggest classroom, put all the 4th graders in there like a bunch of cattle, and just put on a movie for us. And the film that they picked for some reason was Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. They put on a film for children called The Temple of Doom. Of Doom! What the hell is going on here? We were subjected to some guy getting strapped up on this sacrificial torture device while everyone's chanting Kali Ma, Kali Ma. And then the creepy as fuck shaman grabbing the guy's chest and pulling his beating heart out, still pulsating and dripping with blood. And then they throw him into the fire while everyone's still chanting and screaming and you still see the heart beating and beating. Why the hell would you show that to children? I remember all the kids screaming, crying, hiding under their arms, and I think the teachers had to turn it off and just put on Looney Tunes or something to calm us all down. But me, although I was terrified and screaming along with everyone else, I couldn't look away. And to this day, it's just utterly fascinated me. And another film that I was way too young to be watching at the time was The Mummy's Ghost. I've told this story before a few times on the show, but this was actually the first horror film that I ever saw. I'm not sure how old I was, but I couldn't have been more than 10 years old. My dad had fallen asleep in his chair downstairs watching TV, as often was the case. And I had sleeping problems as a kid, so I would often wander downstairs and lay on the couch and watch whatever was on the TV until I could fall asleep. But this one night in particular, it wasn't playing the Andy Griffith Show or MASH like it usually was. It was on Turner Classic Movies or Monster Vision or something like that, and it was playing The Mummy's Ghost. I, of course, didn't know the name of the film or anything about it. All I knew is that it was the scariest thing that I had ever seen in my life. I'll always remember that image of the mummy carrying the rotting corpse of his mummy princess deep into the bayou and slowly sinking into the swamp. It was burned into my nightmares for many, many years, making the mummy the scariest monster to me at the time. It wasn't until college until I learned the name of the film and was able to rewatch it with adult eyes. Now I can look back at it and laugh, but I'll always be that kid inside who was scared of the mummy. And the film obviously was one of the main catalysts that drew me towards the spooky stuff. And last on the list, mainly because it was a big turning point for me, was The Haunted Mansion starring Eddie Murphy. Now, I'm just gonna be straight up, this is not a good film. I do not recommend it by any means. Not only does it not pay great respect to the source material, but it also just doesn't really work as a film. But this was a very important film in sparking my horror interest because this is the film that made me overcome my fear of being scared of everything. We went as a family to go see it, not by my choice, obviously. I was still terrified. I remember I couldn't breathe, my heart was racing. But over the course of the film, I found out that I liked being scared instead of being too scared to be scared, if that makes sense. So instead of being in my own head too much, I was finally able to enjoy stuff for what it is, and I was able to take that leap where I wasn't too scared to check out some of these films. So from there, in the few years after, I was checking out Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street, all the classics, and many, many years after that, here I am today hosting this show. So without The Haunted Mansion and without all of these films, I probably wouldn't be here. But have you guys seen any of these films before? Let me know down in the comment section below, and let me know what scared you when you were a kid. And also, if you guys haven't already, please make sure that you subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you know when I come out with new videos. And if you were to give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend, it would be greatly appreciated. I will catch you guys back here tomorrow for another episode from the House of Horror, and as always, take care and stay spooky.